Hey guys, Louie here. Sorry I didn't get to the video yesterday. My screencast software crashed and I almost ruined my Mac trying to get it to work. So I'm going a different route today. Today I want to talk about the relationship of gold and silver. And this is going to be kind of the underbelly of silver and the history of why it fell out of favor and why it was demonetized and how that affected the gold to silver ratio. And I'm going to go all the way back millennium, all right, and then kind of move us up through the future so that you get a feeling for the baggage that comes with silver, the reason that it is considered a secondary precious metal to gold, and talk a little bit about that ratio and how the events of civilization changed the dynamic of silver's value in relationship to gold. And there's some politics involved as well. But let's get going, because I think the better you understand it, the more you will reject people that are touting $100 silver, $1,000 silver, et cetera, et cetera. We have to respect the natural order of things. And what I have in front of you here is the history of silver. This is given to us by Gainesville Coins. So let's get going, and perhaps at the end, you'll have a better understanding of what to expect. And to a little bit of a spoiler, silver is a long-term investment that is quite volatile, that brings with it opportunity, not necessarily to hold for the long term, but opportunity to trade when the time is right, and how natural events will affect the value of silver. All right, let's get going. I'll explain what I mean. All right, according to this chart, 3,000 years ago, the first hard rock silver mines were opened. I understood recently from a video I think Sal did that a lot of the silver that was used by the Romans came from Iberia, which I think is actually Spain, Italy. Moving forward, in the old days, silver was nearly as rare as gold, and you could say there was a 1-to-1 ratio, or perhaps a little more than that. And that silver, the size of a dime, could pay a Roman legionnaire's wages for the day. So it was the valuable means of transfer, of wealth transfer and labor transfer. Of course, back then, there was not as much silver, and it was much harder to get out of the ground, given the techniques. So it was natural that silver would have a strong relationship to gold. All right, we will go forward. Let's flip all the way forward. We all know the Roman story and how they debased their silver over time, ultimately turning it into bronze and copper, and which coincided pretty handily with the demise of the empire. But that's not what this story is about. Let's move forward to the Middle Ages and so forth. And, at the time, there was a natural desire for silver. It was still pretty rare, and countries traded it readily. They also had gold, but gold was often kept by the elite and the aristocrats, right? And in the king's vault and so forth. So silver was, the medium of exchange, as well as goods and services. But something happened, and this is the first blow to silver, why silver took a notch down in terms of what the world thought was valuable. When Spain conquered Latin America, they came across vast quantities of silver and, devastated, I believe, the Aztecs and the Incas, devastated those societies to confiscate their giant silver mines. They immediately brought that back to Spain and started to spend it. All right. Well, what happened after that? Well, after that was many, many decades if not centuries, of grief and poor economic situations, because Spain had devalued their silver. They had brought so much back into their country that the value of silver dropped rapidly. All right. And they had so much that they actually had to pay more and more of their silver to get goods and services from the rest of Europe. This was the first major blow to silver's value because the available amount of silver increased dramatically. It ruined the country. It ruined millions of lives. And another lesson, this is kind of the converse of what happened with the Romans, but too much silver, when you increase the supply, can have an effect on the value and certainly its relationship to gold. And I believe that left a bad taste in Europe's mouth for centuries, right? Silver was dangerous. Silver was volatile. Silver, new supplies of silver could be found and could devalue that medium rapidly. All right, we're going to move into America, but of course, in between 1545 and when the Comstock lode was discovered, the founders of America designed the first coinage act, and at that time, the ratio of gold to silver was 16-1. The primary silver medium of exchange was the Spanish real, piece of 8. And actually, that's what was traded in America primarily for, gosh, I think another 100 years. But the natural relationship between gold and silver, the value of the bullion was 16-1. And Spain had come to rely on that ratio, and that was traded all around the world. Naturally, when the founders did a coinage act, they needed silver and gold, a bimetallic standard. They set it at 16-1. Shortly after that, the value of silver dropped. That could have to do with, I don't know exactly if that was supply-driven or demand-driven, and they altered the ratio from 15-1 to 16-1. But over time, what was happening around the world was that gold was being equated to prosperity and silver was being equated to lack of stability. And the countries that embraced silver more readily and longer, such as India and China, actually had inferior economic results. Wages were lower, people's standard of living was lower. And when those countries went to trade abroad, they found that gold was being adopted more readily and that the silver was less value, again, making it harder for them to purchase those goods and services from more mature nations. This is the transformation of into the gold standard. It happened in Europe first, and then over time, it was recognized that if the United States remained at 16-1, when the ratio was increasing to 20-1, 23-1, 30-1, naturally, in terms of the price of bullion, driven by supply and demand dropping because governments were no longer supporting silver, and supply perhaps increasing, and then ultimately increasing with the discovery of massive amounts of silver on the west coast of the United States. It was a declining medium of exchange, and the gold was considered the superior metal. It was considered superior in terms of stability. Okay, gold, the gold standard was basically a stability standard. It was a country that could be trusted. It was a country that could be traded with on equilibrium. The silver standard was very volatile and tended to result in inflation. All right, and this is when silver started to become known as the people's metal, all right, because we were an agricultural society. Now, a farmer that planted his crops and then several, months later went to sell them, wanted to see price appreciation to repay their debts with lower valuable money, money of lower value, and to reap higher rewards. Who didn't want silver? And this is where the bankers and the industrialists came into play. They wanted a stable dollar, which often equated to lower interest rates, lower cost of financing. What was happening at the same time? Well, our country was expanding rapidly, and railroads and industrialization needed to be financed. And this is where the bankers and the industrialists took one corner, and that corner was populated with gold. And the populace and the people who had probably never seen a piece of gold in their life, the farmers, the workers, transacted in silver. And they were on opposite sides of the spectrum. Well, you know how this all turned out. Ultimately, in the crime of 1874, I believe it is, which is talked about by Truth Never Told, Chris Duane, he talks about it being the crime of the century. However, he does not talk about why it happened. All right, had the United States remained on a silver standard at 16 to 1, then all of the gold would have left the country, right? Because other countries would have paid us in silver and would have extracted gold. At the time, the ratio was much higher in the bullion market, and, gold was more valuable overseas. Silver was not. So it was almost a fait accompli that the United States, to remain competitive in the world and take its place as a dominant power, had to move to the gold standard. They possibly could have stayed on the silver standard and bimetallism, but it would have required restating that ratio to a much higher level. I imagine that would have been politically unpopular as well, to devalue the silver coinage, which was held by the people. So it was probably easier to just demonetize silver completely, which is what they did, sending shockwaves, throughout the population. But it was required to continue the growth of the country in a stable fashion. Now, of course, with all the silver that was being found in the West, there was strong political pressure to bring it back. And in 1878, I believe it is, the Bland-Allison Act authorized the Morgan silver dollar. But once again, they embraced the 16 to 1 ratio. All right, at the time, the ratio was much higher internationally in the bullion market. For that reason, the politicians limited the amount of silver that could be bought. And it was actually a rather small amount over time in relation to the needs of currency in the country. And that was increased a little bit at one time, but it ultimately wound up being a mistake, and it could not be sustained because they would not set the ratio at the natural ratio in excess of 30 to 1. That is why the silver dollars ceased to exist. That is why they melted them. They needed to eradicate silver at the 16 to 1 ratio. All right, we had another stint with William Jennings Bryan, who again tried to bring back the people's metal, but he wanted to do it at 16 to 1, and the natural ratio was much higher, and they would not concede that fact. And, the people lost in relation to the bankers and the industrialists, and that was the death knell for silver. Of course, coinage has always been utilized by the United States, but it is in a much smaller relationship. And when the dollar was pegged to gold, silver became somewhat irrelevant other than pocket change. All right. So there we are moving through history. Of course, we know that silver was ultimately demonetized completely and then taken out of our coinage. And when we look back at the historical ratios, when I hear channels talk about $100 silver, talk about $1,000 silver, I think they're divorcing the reality and the history of silver that most people don't really know. They hear sound bites and they think all precious metals are the same. They are not the same. Gold has, for a long time now, been the premier precious metal. Silver is important because it is precious and it has industrial uses which are growing, but that history, and some of it a dark history, casts a long shadow over silver. And this is, so we have to stay within the natural relationships. As you know, a couple years ago, silver was just beginning to push over $20, and that was happening naturally in supply and demand and industrial uses. Then along came the silver squeeze. What went wrong with the silver squeeze? Well, it was much like what the country did when they tried to perpetuate a 16-to-1 ratio when the natural value was 30. All right, the silver squeeze pushed forward a lot of demand. It was very exciting. I got caught up in it as well, and I think many people did. But they pushed forward all that demand and created an unnatural move up to 30, divorced from supply and demand other than short-term supply and demand issues. Of course, it also raised premiums, but it could not be sustained because the natural order of things needed to bring it back down. Had the silver squeeze never happened, we probably would have pushed over 20. We probably would be in the low 20s right now, right about where we are after the boom and bust of the silver squeeze, because we need to look to the natural supply and demand metrics. Silver has many things going for it, okay? I don't mean to be down on silver. I stack primarily silver because I want to, at some time, when the ratio drops from 80-to-1, which it currently is, back down to 60 or 50 or 40, I want to trade out for gold, okay? That's my long-term goal. It's not to hold silver forever because it is very volatile, and it will move up and it will move down. What does it have going in its favor? Well, uses of silver are expanding dramatically. What does it have in its favor? The cost of mining silver is escalating rapidly, primarily due to petroleum and labor and insurance and machinery. All right, what does it have going against it? Well, some of the techniques are getting more sophisticated. What does it have going for it? Environmental controls will make it rarer. What does it have going against it? As the price of base metals continues to rise, there's going to be more production of base metals, and silver is ancillary to those mining operations. That'll create more supply. If you can figure out where that's headed, then you're way smarter than I am because there's a lot of countervening forces. But I do know that over time, that silver increases in price, and it does so erratically, all right? I was fortunate that I didn't get into stacking until 2014. It had just come off a run to 50. Right? And then fell back down. When I got involved, it was under 20 and moving down. And that was a fortunate time to stack because I got silver as cheap as $14 with low premiums. But I think we have to watch the natural cycles. I think if you're going to stack silver, understand the history and understand that silver is not gold, okay? And perhaps it will be the most important metal of all time. Perhaps, what Chris Drain says is gold will be irrelevant and silver will be the most important metal. But I don't think so. Okay, I think we have to respect history and respect what silver has done over centuries, and then watch what happens in the modern world with modern dynamics. And then I think you can expect an increase in the price of silver over time in a reasonable proportion. Could you double your money? Yes, you very well could. Could silver push over 50? It could, very well could. But remember that gold is the golden ticket in the end. And understand that these ratios go back millennium, and you really need to respect the history of silver and not buy the rhetoric and just think that because somebody said silver is moving to $100 that it's naturally going to happen. The squeeze is behind us. I believe right now that we should be boycotting American Silver Eagles to bring those premiums back down. It's arbitrary. It's artificial. It's been created by the U.S. Mint constricting supply. It's been created by the distributors, as they say, making hay while the sun shines. Well, I hope that's over. And I hope if silver settles in here in the low 20s and we can get premiums back down, I think you will be in the exact same position that I was in 2014 and 2015. And then you give it some years. All right, that is stacking for the long term. That's the reality. And now I hope that I've told you a couple things that increases your awareness of this metal and what it means to the world. All right, guys, please let me know your thoughts. I know this is not necessarily a popular topic. I think silver is amazing. I really think it can do fabulous things for you and your family and perhaps your heirs over time. It doesn't go down over time in the long run. It goes up. Okay, so we have that going for us, and any mistakes that we've made usually get repaired over time. So it's the place to be, and I think this may be the time to really look at it carefully. You guys take care, and I will talk to you soon.